Again, thank you very much for attending this training. And the subject matter is about behavior-based safety. I limited it as a primer kasi katulad ng any na pintura, iba pag nilagay ng primer is para lang magkaroon tayo ng idea, some kind of an introduction on the subject matter. So hopefully, there are several learning outcomes that we wanted to satisfy at the end of the training. Sana ma-satisfy at the end of this. And there will be probably discussions along the way and questions na pwede natin tanungin. I hope na this will be an interactive and collaborative training in such a way that all of us are also experienced practitioners. Probably some are aspirants, and hindi po ako psychology or behavior science major. So I think for those people who have that level of expertise and they are majors of those expertise, may add up to whatever things that I may be able to say here. So, okay. Now, let us first discuss what are the things that we are expecting from this training. So on completion of this training, we are expected that we can explain the key variables affecting individual behavior. So it means na complex pala yung behavior ng isang tao. Hindi lang siya ganun kasimple para ma-generalize mo ang pagkatao ng isang tao or yung behavior, yung paggalaw or pagkilos or pagsasalita ng isang tao. The next is that we should explain, at the end of this training, we should explain the interrelationships and interdependency between attitude, behavior, and culture. And later, we will also define what are the differences between these three and how behavior works. Because for us to behavior, first we need to understand how behavior works.
Sir Ron, naka-unmute po kayo.
Sorry. Which part ng na-mute ako? Sorry, naka-mute ako. Okay, again, I'll repeat. Explain the key variables affecting individual behavior. We also need to explain the interrelationships or interdependencies between attitude, behavior, and culture. As I said, later on, we'll define what are the differences of each and every interrelationships. And for us to understand and change the behavior, considering behavior-based safety principle, we need to also understand, we should understand how behavior works. Paano ba gumagalaw ang behavior? The next is that for us to understand behavior, we should understand also what we call ABC analysis. And later on, what are the factors that affects the consequence of behavior. Next is that we need to outline, we can outline at the end of this training, we should at least outline the primary antecedents and consequences of at-risk behavior. Later on, we need to understand what are these terminologies that we are discussing at this moment. The next is we should explain how powerful consequences are determined and sustained. It means that meron palang mga consequences na or iba-iba pala ang impact ng consequences with regards to behavior. At yung powerful consequences na yun ang nangingibabaw kaya nagbabago ang isang tao. Or dahil kaya niya ginagawa yung isang bagay na yun. The next is that we should explain the behavior inventory and its selection process. This is where now the behavior change process takes place. It means that we should identify what are the necessary behaviors that we need to look for and how these behaviors are being selected. So there's a process of selecting these behaviors at work. Next is that there are actually outline the stages of the observation and feedback, which is already part of the behavior change process. And last but not the least, of course, what are the steps in order to remove the barriers? First, what are those barriers and how to remove those barriers? Okay, so these are the things that we will be hopefully achieving at the end of this training. Okay, now looking into this diagram or this figure, you'll see that an individual behavior uh, have different variables that affects or the outcome of these variables define what's the individual behavior of the person. So based from this, sinasabi lang dito na yung everything starts from the values. If you look at the chronological order of this. So ano ba yung values? Pagka sinabi natin kasing values, these are very important things that we normally believe in. And normally these are the outcomes of the customs or traditions or culture where the person belongs. Kaya itong value, kaya may natatandaan ninyo if you still recall nung those people who have managed to experience may mga values education ng elementary or even I don't know whether extended it will be even extended until high school. Pinag-aaralin yung values education kasi it transcends na ipapasa kasi ito from one generation to another. And you will be able to realize this kasi nakikita mo dun sa manifestation ng mga susunod na henerasyon. Sabi nga, pag makulit ka, paglaki ng pag nagkaroon ka ng anak, mas makulit, 'di ba? Ganun yung cliche eh. Ganun yung paniniwala eh na so it means na kung ano yung paniniwala ng or ano ang kinalakihan ng isang tao habang lumalaki siya, na-adapt niya 'yon. And that is defined by the custom, the traditions, and by the culture where the person is. Kaya iba yung kultura ng kahit Pilipino, pare-parehas tayong Pilipino, pero uh, if you are given the opportunity to live or brought up sa ibang bansa, katulad sa Amerika or sa Australia or sa Canada, then you are adopting those kind of values or their cultures which define your values. Of course, iba naman din kung ikaw ay laki sa Pilipinas. And yung values na yun ang humuhubog sa'yo. It molds you on what are your attitudes. Remember, attitude is something invisible. Hindi mo nakikita yan sa isang tao. And normally, this is the outcome of a predetermined response. And it is being built up as a result of experiences of similar situations. So, yung attitude ng isang tao, hindi mo nakikita yan. Pero nababago yan dun sa mga na-experience niya. So, yung attitude natin before, I'll try to cite this COVID-19 pandemic, iba yung perception natin pagdating sa wearing of mask, yung paghuhugas ng kamay, all these things have been changed when this pandemic came in. Ganon din naman kapag kunyari ikaw ay nung bata-bata tayo we can say we are gullible. Wow, social na term, no? Pero in short sa Tagalog ibig sabihin lang no uto-uto, no? So it means na lahat pinaniniwalaan natin, lahat maayos sa atin, lahat um ma okay, kumbaga we are accepting everything. We are receptive to everything. Pero habang tumatagal, nababago yun kasi may mga bagay na na-experience ka, maaaring sigurong hindi na meet yung expectations mo, o maaaring may mga bagay na nag-enhance dun sa paniniwala mo, kaya mas lalo kang naniwala ng paniniwala. So, both all these things shape your attitude. But there's no manifestation, there's no physical manifestation of the attitude. Now, apart from attitude, there's also personality. Again, this personality is also not obviously seen. Kasi ang personalidad, hindi po ito overnight na babago. And ito yung mga katulad ng mga either yung tao introvert sa loob lang ng bahay, ayaw ng mga social gatherings. May mga tao naman na masyadong madaldal, masyadong palakaibigan. These are all what we call extrovert. And these are not things that can be changed dramatically overnight. And normally, as per behavioral science or mga psychology majors, sinasabi ang personalidad ng tao ay being shaped by two things, by nature or by, what you call this, by nature or by nurture. Nurture, ito yung sinasabi nila na may paniniwala na walang mangga na, sorry, what, walang bunga, walang mangga na, how will you say that? Hindi namumunga ng mangga ang puno ng bayaba, something like that. Which means that based on how we are being brought up by our parents, by our relatives, they have direct influence to our personality. So typically, kapag militar yung tatay, stricto din ang anak. Kasi namamana niya eh. Um, bakit kapag ang magulang ay doktor or abogado, typically yun din ang field of expertise or kurso na gustong kunin ng isang anak. No? So nauhubog yun. No? However, merong another school of thought na ang personality of the person is being defined by the environment, by nature. Kasi nasabi nila, may dun pumapasok yung idea na bakit may black sheep. Kasi kung lahat maayos naman ng anak, all of a sudden biglang merong lumilitaw na iba. So, maaring no matter how strong your fundamentals or your values are, once you are exposed to a group of people, na-adapt ng tao yun eh. Kaya nakikita mo yun dun sa kultura at dun sa kustumbre at saka yung tradisyon ng mga magkakasamang tao. So these two are the two different school of thoughts that define the personality of the person. At ingat tayo rito kasi hindi natin nakikita to. At kahit ang human resource management, ng mga HR, ito ang tinitingnan. Bakit? I remember when I was still teaching in the Philippines, when I was teaching in the university then, I have come across a professor who happens to be, you can say, highly accolades kasi talino rin siya, magaling din siya. Kumbaga, you cannot actually question the academic competency of the person. Pero bumabagsak siya sa tawag na psychological test kasi something within that person na maaring unstable siya. Kaya nagkakaroon nga ng tinatawag tayo na, di ba, may mga multiple personality disorder, yung mga may tinatawag bipolar. These are personalities. Kasi hindi ito na-define overnight. No? Or nag-change ng overnight. So, that's it. And also, individual behavior is also defined by the attitude or ability, which is the capability of the person to do the task. Um, Now, going to the attitude part, it is divided into two, motivation or perception. And these two are interdependent with each other. But sinabi mo kasi motivation, this is something that you are doing on your own volition. It means that no one is forcing you to do that. And there's different kinds of motivation. May internal motivation kasi bakit ka ba nagpapakahirap mag-aral o bakit ka ba nagpapakahirap na gawin ng isang bagay? Like those people who are trying to elevate their competency level by attending classes until this moment na nagtatrabaho ka na. Because you have something that walang pwedeng magbigay sa nun. Sarili mo yon. Bakit ba yung iba is parang, and I am one of those people, bakit ba ano tayo mag-aral? Bakit ba, ano ba makukuha mo? Samantalang satisfied ka na dapat dahil lahat naman tayo, yun lang naman ang minimum requirement natin, makakuha ng degree sa college. Pero why you are doing that? There is a reason behind it. self-satisfaction that you can get out of that. Meron din naman tinatawag na external motivation. Ito yung normally binibigay sa atin ng kumpanya, like may bonus tayo o meron tayong mga gifts na binibigay. Kunyari naka 5 taon ka, 10 taon ka, 15 taon ka sa kumpanya. These are external motivations. Your family is an external motivation kasi especially during this period, marami tayong na-encounter na problema. And one of the things that continues us, one of the reasons that continues us to do these things, kasi dahil sa pamilya. Bakit ba tayo nag-abroad? For those people who are in abroad. And for those people na nasa Pilipinas, bakit tayo nagsusumika pa rin kahit na mahirap ang buhay sa Pilipinas? Because may external motivation. Meron din tinatawag na physiological motivation. Ito yung basic requirement. Bakit mo kailangan magtiyaga sa trabaho yan? Kasi kailangan kumain. Kaya walang pambibili, walang pambabayad ng Meralco. All these things, these basic needs are also part of motivation. And apart from that, last but not the least, there's also social motivation kasi human beings are social animals eh. Hindi kaya sabi nila no man is an island. Walang nag-exist na isang tao sa mundo. So there is also a peer pressure. So there is also a motivation. Sa kaya sabi nga gano'n eh, tell me who your friends are and I will tell you who you are. Kasi it all affects each other. Now, apart from that is the perception. Perception, pag sinabing perception, it is actually the amount of information that you are perceiving or nare-receive mo using your senses. Yung paano mo nakita yung isang bagay, naamoy, nahawakan, naramdaman. These are all perception. But these information that are obtained from your senses are being processed by your mind. Pinifilter ng utak mo yan. At doon pa lang niya malalaman, oh, okay, okay ito. Ito actually yung unang ginawa ng unang tao nung nadiskubre nila yung apoy. The first invention that man made was fire. At nalaman nila na based on perception, nawakan nila, napaso sila, ay mainit yung apoy. So the process of converting this information into useful information is what we call the perception. Now, apart from that, there's a learning, education, and training, which are all part of our development. These are both academic or vocational, yung habang natututo ka sa trabaho mo at habang nag-aaral ka rin, lahat ito na naiipon eh. And this defines your ability and aptitude. Doon ka nagiging more competent sa trabaho mo. And all of these things, the motivation, the perception, the learning, the education, the ability, the attitude, defines the behavior of the person. So, ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng behavior? Behavior is nothing but the manifestation, the observable act, or what the person says. So kapag narinig mo, may narinig ka sa isang tao, o nakita mong ginawi ng isang tao, tama ba yung Tagalog? I don't know, bulol po kasi ako eh. So I don't know exactly whether that is the right Filipino word for that or Tagalog word for that. But whatever the person acts or says, these are all what we call behavior. So kaya nga sabi niya ngayon, di ba sa pandemic, ngayon mas maging mapagpasensya tayo, mas maging open-minded tayo. Kasi hindi natin alam yung pinagdadaanan ng tao, bakit niya nasabi yon, bakit niya ginawi yon. So this defines actually how complex a behavior is. So hindi mo mag-generalize na kaya niya ginawi yan kasi ganyan siya. No. There are several factors or variables that define the behavior of that person. Baka meron siyang dating naging experience, yun yung attitude niya. Or siguro magulang niya hindi I mean, I'm not saying I'm not against, but maaaring galing siya sa broken family. So nagkaroon siya ng phobia. So ayaw niya na ng doon pumapasok yung ayaw niya na ng ganitong sitwasyon. Or takot siyang magtiwala. All these things define the behavior of the person. So this is how complex the person is. Kaya napakahirap pag-aralan ng tao eh. Kasi napaka-komplikado niya. So this defines everything. Next. Ayaw na gumalaw. Now, there is what you call the ABC model or the attitude, behavior, culture model. Sabi natin yung attitude hindi nakikita. Kasi epekto ito ng mga nangyari sa isang tao. When you say about culture naman, culture is actually a shared. So it means it is a group dynamics. Shared belief, values, um, behaviors of the people. So normally, na-encounter mo tong culture kasi more than one person. Yun yung nagde-define ng culture. Okay? So, in between these two is actually what we call behavior. Among these three, behavior lang po yung nakikita natin. Itong kultura ng isang organisasyon or kultura ng isang society, hindi natin yan nakikita. Kung ano yung nakikita natin, the manifestation of the culture, the manifestation of an attitude is nothing but the behavior. Yun po yung nakikita natin, yung naririnig natin na binabanggit ng isang tao, at yun ang ginagawin ng isang tao. So, if you'll notice, there is a interdependency among these three. The attitude shapes the behavior. However, the behavior forms the culture because sabi nga natin, ang kultura ay binubuo ng mga tao at ang bawat tao ay may behavior. However, the culture also is interdependent with attitude and behavior in such a way that culture influences the attitude and the behavior. Kaya yun yung sinasabi lagi ni Sir Albino na when you want to know or when you wanted to join in an organization, the first thing that you need to know is determine or identify the culture of the organization. Because it influences, nai-impluensyahan, nakakatuwa kasi ang attitude, individual. Ang kultura, grupo. So it means that what happens here is that the individual attitude of the individual in an organization defines or forms the culture. Likewise, the culture also affects or influences the attitude as well as the behavior of the person. Now, the question is, in behavior-based safety, if we'll go back to the principle of behavior-based safety, knowing that they are interdependent, pag sinabi po kasi interdependent, pag ginalaw mo yung isa, may epekto sa kabila. So, vice versa. Pag ginalaw mo yung attitude, may mababago sa behavior, may mababago sa kultura. Ganon din naman pag ginalaw mo yung behavior, mababago sa attitude. So which one are we going to consider first in order for us to effectively address behavior-based safety? Now, as I said, before we start with the behavior-based safety, we need to understand also how the behavior works. Dito pumapasok yung terminology na antecedent, consequence, and behavior. ABC rin siya. Parang attitude, behavior, at culture. But in this way, this is how the behavior works. Antecedent is something that has happened before the behavior. We're talking about here the same human being. Antecedent is something that has been done before the behavior, and consequence is the outcome of the behavior. So this is ito yung tinatawag ng cause and effect. Yung antecedent yung naging cause, bakit ginawa ng isang tao yung behavior na yon. Again, behavior is something that the person did. So act yon and say or say. So ang behavior hindi lang sa paggawa, pati rin sa pagsasalita. And consequence is the outcome or the result of that behavior. Okay? I hope that my voice is clear to everyone. Now, I'll just show you the video on how the first, I was asking a question based on this, what controls the behavior? Sa palagay po ba natin, anong nagko-control sa behavior considering that they are all interlinked? Again, yung antecedent, siya yung isang bagay na ginagawa o nagawa. Kaya lumabas yung behavior. At yung consequence naman, resulta ng behavior. Can you please place on the or respond to the chat box? Sa palagay ninyo, ano po yung nagko-control sa behavior? Yung bago yung behavior or after ng behavior na tinatawag natin consequence? Or parehas sila? Can you write, please, based on, para magkaroon lang tayo ng ano. So from Mr. Centex Pharma, AJ Esturco, both. Miss Venus Badiongan, both. Gerald Bravo, Mr. Gerald Bravo, after, which is the consequence. So Miss Juveline, consequence. Miss Clemente, after, which is the consequence. Anything. Hindi pa po nagbibigay, para lang magkaroon kayo ng um, participation, which is very important sa ating training. Sa tingin niyo, ano po ba ang mas nagko-control sa behavior? Yung antecedent ba, which is before? O yung consequence, which is after? Or parehas? Mr. Elmar Angco, consequence. Mr. Bonga, after. Mr. Raul, both. Ma'am Tess, both. Sir Ferdy, before. Sir Emmanuel, both. Mr. Jason, both. Mr. Paras, both. Okay, now, I will just show to you this video that will give us an idea whether antecedent po ba or consequence or pareha sila na nagko-control sa behavior. I hope na okay yung video na to. Sabihin niyo po sa akin kung hindi
To use an everyday example, let's consider the behavior of answering the door when the doorbell rings. Here, Joe is preparing for a date with Catherine, who has finally agreed to a dinner for two at Joe's house. Although Joe does not expect Catherine anytime soon, the antecedent of the doorbell ringing acts as a trigger. The behavior is the observable act of Joe going to the door and opening it. The consequence is Joe seeing and talking to whoever is at the door. What controls Joe's behavior of going to the door? The antecedent, the doorbell ringing, or the consequence, seeing who is at the door? This is almost a trick question. Both the antecedent and the consequence influence behavior, but in very different ways. Although the antecedent of the doorbell ringing may have signaled Joe to see who was at the door, he would probably start ignoring that antecedent if it kept ringing and each time he answered it, there was an undesired result. Let's watch how the consequences affect Joe's behavior. In this scene, when Joe thought Catherine was at the door, he answered it. When he thought that the children playing tricks were there, he didn't answer the door. Unfortunately, Joe's behavior of not answering the door ruined this evening. Similarly, in safety, many companies rely on antecedents without considering consequences. Antecedents used before.
So, it only means po that whoever answered that the consequence is the one that controls the behavior is correct. Both antecedent and consequence influence. Take note of the word influence. Naiimpluwensyahan ng antecedent at ng consequence ang behavior. But antecedent only triggers the behavior. However, it is the consequence that controls the behavior. Diba ganyan yung typical na the short story na yung The Boy Who Cries the Wolf Bell, but I can't exactly say, na kapag palagi ka nagbibiro or nagsisinungaling, dadating yung time na hindi ka na paniniwalaan. So that's the classic example of the antecedent, behavior, and the consequence. So it triggers. The antecedent is the one that triggers the behavior. Bakit siya kumilos? Bakit niya binuksan ng pinto? Kasi may nag-doorbell. Pero nababago yung behavior niya kasi hindi na niya nami-meet yung expectation. And that is actually the outcome of the consequence. So, sa workplace, sa ating organization, normally, yung mga antecedents na yan, ito yung mga ginagamit nating more on administrative controls. Yung naglalagay tayo ng signages. No parking, o kaya wear PPE, or may mga trainings tayong binibigay or mga programs tayong binibigay. Ito lahat ng to ay mga antecedents. Meaning, we are trying to, by instituting or by giving all these signages or posters or safety meetings, we are expecting that the behavior will be improved and lean towards safety. Now, the problem with that is that if the antecedent did not result to your expected outcome, which is your consequence, doon na nawawala ng gana yung worker. Kasi may certain level of expectation ka na ginagawa mo ito dahil meron kang gustong makuha. Pag hindi yun natupad, nawawala na ng gana yung gumagawa. Okay? So, the effectiveness of the antecedents like signages, safety meetings, the programs, the trainings that you are providing, the suitable tools and equipment are all dependent whether it can predict the real consequence. Kasi pag hindi niya kaya ma-predict yun, bakit ba tayo pag nagkakaroon tayo ng training, di ba? At the end, yung HR namimigay ng form, sinasabi kung ano yung expected outcome at nangyari ba yun sa workplace. Kasi pag hindi yun nangyari, pakiramdam natin baliwala yung ginawa natin. Okay? So antecedent and consequence both influences behavior in different ways. Like what I said, antecedent is a trigger that initiates the behavior. However, it is the consequence that controls the behavior. So, marami tayong pagkakataon na nagtataka tayo during our inspections, during our audits. We are questioning, why is it that there are people that are willing to take the risk? Like classic example, itong case study na to. A worker is not wearing safety glasses and face shield while grinding, even though there is an available safety glasses with the worker. And slogans, posters, and signages are placed around the workplace which remind the workers to wear PPE at work. Bakit ba may mga matitigas ang ulo? Di ba? Bakit andyan na, binigyan mo na, sinabihan mo na, ang daming beses, may mga nakapost naman, dumaten naman ng safety meeting, ulit-ulit mo sinasabi, para ka nang silang plaka, pero bakit ginagawa pa rin nila yun? Okay? So, mapapaisip ka why the worker is doing at-risk behavior. Take note, at-risk behavior. Later on, may tatanong ako sa inyo kung wala magtatanong. Ako ang magtatanong kung hindi ito itatanong. Pero tricky ito, pero I wanted everyone to be more meticulous with the terminology. So the question with regards to this case study is that why is it that the worker is doing at-risk behavior? I will show you this video of that particular case study.
Nate, I noticed you weren't wearing your safety glasses or your face shield when I started my observation. Come on, Nate. Why didn't you wear them?
These things aren't any good. I mean, they keep sliding down my nose. They get in the way of the work I'm trying to do. And as far as the face shields, they always disappear.
Okay, well, what can we do to fix that?
You know, for starters, you could try to get some of those straps that the sports guys wear. I mean, they keep their glasses up. Maybe it'll work for me.
I think I can get you some of those straps, right? And I'm sure I can get you a face shield. But until then, you promise me to keep those safety glasses on?
Okay.
Okay, good. You know, I'm going to talk to the steering committee about this, see if we can solve this problem.
So if you will notice that during the observation, nakita nung tao na hindi nga nag-wear. No? The best thing that you can do for this is, as what has been depicted in this video, is ask the person. Kasi whether reasonable or irreasonable, or unreasonable, you can say, reasonable or unreasonable, may dahilan siya. That reason, whether logical or illogical, kailangan mong malaman bakit niya hindi sinusuot. Minsan kadalasan, ang nakikita lang natin during our inspection, yung hindi nila paggawa ng tama. Pero we never ask that particular question. And we normally ask these questions during the investigation when there is an accident. Pero yung bago pa lang magkaroon ng aksidente, pag nakita mo, very, very few na nagtatanong, bakit niya ginawa yon? And that is very important. And you'll see, dalawang dahilan ang binigay niya. No? Nahuhulog lagi sa ilong niya at laging nawawala yung face shield dun sa trabaho niya, dun sa position kung saan siya nagtatrabaho. But what is important in this is that you came to know the reason. And this mechanism, they call that feedback mechanism, when there is an observation, after the observation, remember, yung feedback na to, binibigay ito ng isang observer dun sa tao na nag-behave o may nag-exhibit siya ng behavior. So the feedback is very important kasi this will define whether yung ginawa ng tao ay tama or mali. Okay? Immediate yung response mo eh. So hindi mo na kailangang antayin na magkaroon ng aksidente, sinasabi mo na agad sa kanya na, or tinasabi mo na bakit hindi mo ginagawa to. So you need to, as a safety practitioner, you should listen more and evaluate during the time kung reasonable nga ba talaga yung dahilan niya or nagano lang siya, nagbibigay lang siya ng dahilan. But one thing is certain here. Nung sinabi nung observer na, sige, bibigyan kita ng face shield at dadalhan kita kung ano man yung kailangan para hindi mahulog yung safety glasses, nanghingi siya ng assurance doon sa tao na nagbe-behave na at risk. Sabi niya, sige, bibigyan kita nito pero habang hindi kita pa binibigyan, huwag mong tatanggalin yung safety glasses mo. So here you will see the compromise, the communication between the observer and the worker. At nakikita mo yung positive consequence. Kasi mula sa isang at-risk behavior na ginawa niya, Na-shift ito sa safe behavior kasi humingi ka sa kanya ng assurance. Okay? So, if this is that person, ang pangalan niya doon ay Nate, there are two consequences that will happen when that incident happened. Either ma-injured yung tao, or because of comfort or convenience, ginawa niya yon. Kasi siguro may isip ninyo, napaka-obvious naman na kung ikaw ay dun sa in any conventional or logical reason, mas pipiliin mo yung safe behavior that will lead you to prevent injury rather than take mo yung risk na yun dahil lang sa convenience or comfort. Pero kahit na ganun lang kababaw yung convenience and comfort, bakit mas pinili ng tao na gumalaw or mag-manifest ng at-risk behavior rather than doing a safe behavior? Okay? The question is, magkaiba kasi yung power, yung power or strength of these two. Sa tingin natin, in a conventional way, mas powerful ang injury kasi siyempre sinong gusto na ma-injured kumpara sa kumpara sa conveniency or comfort, 'di ba? Pero ganun lang ba kasimple para natin masabi na parang may mali doon sa ginawi ng tao at bakit yun ang nag-define ng kanyang ginawi? There are actually factors to be considered for us to define the power of the consequence. The first is timing. Yun bang consequence na mangyayari? Soon ba yun o later? Kasi malaking factor yun eh. Kung ang tao ay may ine-expect, gusto niya na mangyari agad. Okay? Next is consistency. Talaga nga bang mangyayari yung ine-expect natin na consequence? Or hindi? Hindi natin sigurado. And last but not the least is significance. Is it positive consequence or negative? Ano ibig sabihin ng positive? Positive is something good for the person. Yung taong gumawa nun, good sa kanya yon. It favors him rather than negative. In this case, hindi pabor sa kanya na ma-injured siya. Okay? Pabor sa kanya yung naramdaman niyang convenience at yung comfort. How many times do we consider minor things na nagde-deviate tayo kasi nag-shortcut tayo kasi mas pakiramdam natin okay lang naman, hindi naman ganun ka hindi epekto. Okay? So, we normally incline to those positive consequences. Ito yung nagfe-favor sa atin, masarap ang pakiramdam natin, nagagawa natin, okay, rather than negative one. So, if we will rate these two consequences based on that particular case study, as far as convenience is concerned and injury, yung convenience, oo, sooner niya naramdaman kasi nagagamit niya na eh. Hindi niya sinusuot, so nararamdaman niya yung convenience na kahit walang safety glasses, maganda sa pakiramdam niya. It is consistent because it is certain, naramdaman niya, sure siya, naramdaman niya. And it is positive kasi masarap sa pakiramdam niya. While yung injury, although it is more powerful compared to convenience kung titingnan mo, pero ang problema dito, kapag nangyari yung injury, if nangyari yung aksidente, may injured ba? Posible, yes, sooner. Pero hindi natin sigurado kung kailan. Kaya nga, we are doing risk assessment. We are evaluating the frequency. We don't know exactly when it will happen. And the worst is that injury is a negative consequence. Kasi ayaw ng tao na ma-encounter niya yon. So what will be the impact of this? Normally, those which are sooner, certain, and positive consequences emerge as powerful compared to others. Tulad ng bakit may mga tao lalo ngayon, during Ramadan dito sa Dubai, na yung nagfa-fasting yung mga tao. Although ngayon hindi na issue yung fasting kasi open na. No? Pero bakit mga tao, kahit hindi during Ramadan, bakit marami nag-overspeeding? Samantalang pag nakita mo naman yung lifestyle nila, pag uwi ng bahay, nakahiga lang, nanonood lang ng TV or gagala lang. Pero anong dahilan? I mean, what's the main big issue sa kanila pag na-delay sila 15 minutes sa trabaho sa bahay nila at kailangan nilang mag-overspeed? Diba? Kasi nga, ramdam nila yung positive na nakarating sila ng maaga. Sure sila na makakarating ng maaga kasi mabilis sila magpatakbo. And mangyayari agad yun yung sooner. Di ba ganun din naman pagka meron tayong gustong mangyari or late na tayo sa trabaho. Okay? Gusto natin makarating agad ng maaga doon. Di ba nag-overspeed yung kadalasan? So even though na alam natin na posible tayong maaksidente, pero bakit mas nagte-take tayo ng risk dahil lang sa kakarampot na minuto na ma-benefit tayo? Kasi that particular consequence can be soon, it is certain, and it is positive because you feel good about it. Now, okay. Now let us go for another case study. I wanted you to participate on this by writing down what are the antecedents or what triggers the behavior of this person.
Following recreation of an at-risk behavior, which is failure to wear a face shield when working on machinery. As you watch, make a list of the antecedents that trigger the at-risk behavior in your workbook.
Nakuha niyo po ba o gusto natin ulitin? Okay, anyway, ilang minuto lang naman po ito. Uulitin ko po at paki-jot down po sa inyong mga notes kung ano po yung mga antecedents or ano yung nag-trigger dun sa tao bakit niya ginawa yung trabahong yun. Sensya po. First time ako nag-crop ng
Following recreation of an at-risk behavior, which is failure to wear a face shield when working on machinery. As you watch, make a list of the antecedents that trigger the at-risk behavior in your workbook.
Pwede po ba nating kahit isa lang po doon sa napakarami pwede ninyong isulat na antecedents para lang po magkaroon tayo ng participation. Ano po sa palagay ninyo yung mga dahilan at least kahit isa lang, kung bakit niya ginawa yun. For Mr. AJ Asturco, no good housekeeping. Miss Merly, or Miss Merly, time, dirty or blurry for face shield. Ma'am Tess, dirty face shield. Ano pa po? Amo niya? Hindi niya po amo yung kasamahan lang po niya sa trabaho. Kay Jubilin Claire, quick and easy job. Okay, so probably yun yung time. Is related to time or convenience dahil mabilis ang trabaho. Unclear face shields, Mr. Jason Datu. Mr. Paras, non-compliance of colleague. O so ibig sabihin, dahil may ginawa ng kasama niya, ginaya niya. No? Mr. Mirza, incompetent. Okay? Venus Bojongan, unclear face shield, peer pressure, Mr. Billy Robles, Ator, in hurry, which is time element yan, no? Paul Ko, hindi nakasanayan, which is not usual, no? Alan Nudas, lack of risk awareness or perception. Gerald Bravo, he still needs to look for the face shield, unclear face shield, just simple task to finish. No PPE, no gloves, inadequate enforcement of wearing face shield, complacency. Halos lahat po nakuha naman ninyo. No? Just to summarize, check niyo po kung nakuha ito ay mga bagay na naisulat niyo rin po. No? These are the primary antecedents. First, the equipment is not readily available. Walang matino na face shield, no? Malabo nga, sabi nga sa nila Ma'am Tess, no? Dirty face shield, no? So hindi available yung equipment na matino, kaya hindi na lang niya ginamit, no? Next, there's a cultural norm, napansin niyo yun, no? Na yung kasamahan niya hindi rin gumagamit ng face shield. So bakit niya kailangan mag-wear ng face shield, no? Next, there is a time element here, no? Pressure, time pressure. Gusto nung tao na matapos agad yung trabaho. So, job wanted to be done immediately due to production priority. The condition of the equipment, yung face shield, hindi siya available na matino, hindi rin matino yung condition niya. So, it's difficult to see. Yung warning sign na nakalagay doon to wear face shield, halos hindi mo makita at natatakpan pa, no? So signage requiring to use face shield is partially covered. So hopefully na jot down ninyo lahat ng mga. Ngayon, balikan uli natin tong video na to. Sabi natin kasi the behavior is influenced by both the antecedent and the consequence. What you have mentioned are only to trigger. Ito yung nag-trigger. Bakit niya ginawa yun? No? Yung antecedents. Pero what will be the outcome? Dahil sa ginawa niya yun, what will be the outcomes? What are the outcomes? What are the consequences? So balikan natin yung video. Tingnan niyo po kung ano yung mga consequences. So, considering the same scenario, a while ago you have defined what are the antecedents, which are the triggers to end up with that at-risk behavior. Now, considering the at-risk behavior, what are the things that you think of that will end up after doing this at-risk behavior? Can you please list down here? Consequence. From Mr. AJ Esturco, facial injuries, trauma. Eye injury, Mr. Polko, he said eye injury. Anything more aside from that? Unsafe act, performing hot works, grinding without the required PPE. That is the behavior, ma'am. We wanted to know what will be the outcome of that. Billy Joe Robles continues negative norm culture. That is an antecedent. Merely finish work. Yes, of course. After doing that, the outcome is natapos na yung trabaho. He finished the work. Projectile entering and puncturing the skin, finish work on time. Proceedings to do it again until it is too late. Yes. Unsafe act, that is a behavior. Eye injury, of course. He did his task fast, which is good. Yes. He feels glad when he's done with a smile. Yes. These are all consequences. Okay. Um, I will just share with you the list of those identified consequences after doing this at-risk behavior. There's a possible injury, as everyone has identified immediately, that is very obvious. Worker could get injured, whether face injury, trauma, projectiles going to the eyes, or eye injury. Definitely, whether whatever kind of injury, that is still an injury. However, it was just lucky that he did not get that or achieve that. Also, possibility he may be given reprimand, whether it's a verbal reprimand or a written warning. The worker could have received reprimand but did not, okay? Because he did not follow the standard or the safe operating procedure, or he did not follow the risk assessment, whatever is the necessary thing to do. Of course, like someone has said, he managed to finish the work faster. It saves time. Worker managed to save time by not looking the good face shield. Kasi he will just spend more time looking for the face shield, where in fact during the time, he may have spent that already and finished the work immediately. Kasi he just cut the steel. So napakaliit lang noon, no, to consider yung time na uubusin niya, that he will be able to use his time with regards to looking for the face shield. Comfort. Of course, worker is more comfortable without the face shield. Convenience. Worker is more convenient to do the task without spending time to look for face shield. Peer approval. Co-worker accepted his at-risk behavior. Imagine, after doing that, instead of saying something to him, he even received a pat on his back. So there's a peer approval. And like what antecedents have shown, the person itself, his colleague, was not also wearing face shield. And there's also a better vision because of the condition of the face shield, which is scratched and dirty. So without that face shield, he worked faster, and for him, he enjoyed that more. Okay. So considering the consequences, the question is, which among all these consequences are powerful? In a normal logical sense, of course, no one wants to be reprimanded and no one wants to be injured, as compared to just saving small amount of time, comfort, convenience, peer approval, or better vision. But why is it that the person did that? If the person don't want to be injured or be reprimanded, then what? What is the reason? These are always the same reason that we are encountering or being or asking asking this workers na bakit panay paulit-ulit na lang? These are all being discussed in the safety meeting, in the toolbox talk. Bakit paulit-ulit na lang nilang ginagawa? Pag tinanong mo, why is it that they're doing it? Eh, ano na naman to eh, cutie-cutie minute lang eh. Maikling minuto lang daw tatrabahuhin. No? Sa paghahanap ko ng face shield, tapos ko na to kanina pa. No? Mga ganong mga dahilan. No? So, bakit? This is actually the assignment of the timing, certainty, and significance of all these consequences. If you'll notice for the injury, it will happen soon. The moment the accident happened, definitely injury will happen. However, we don't know when. And in this particular case, the person was lucky na hindi nangyari yung aksidente. And it is a negative consequence kasi ayaw niya mangyari sa kanya yon. No? So he will try to avoid that, to think in his process of evaluating the consequence, he'll try to avoid that notion na mangyayari sa kanya yon. Yung ba tinatawag natin na parang denial stage na, naku, hindi naman mangyayari yan, matagal ko na itong ginagawa eh. 15 years, 20 years ko na itong ginagawa, hindi naman nangyari sa akin. Because no one wants to accept negative impact ng ginagawa niya. Next thing, there might be reprimand. It may be soon or later, depending on the how strong the management system works. But one thing is for sure, it's not sure also that it will happen. It is uncertain kung kailan or gagawin, mangyayari nga talaga yon, hindi natin. At again, it is negative. However, those you can say trivial or maliliit lang, the small things, the small consequences which we think are insignificant, katulad ng maikling panahon o maikling oras lang na na-save niya, yung comfort na naramdaman niya at yung convenience na na-encounter niya during the time na natapos niya ng maaga yung trabaho, yung peer approval na naramdaman niya or na-encounter niya dahil mas pinuri pa siya dahil natapos niya yung oras yung trabaho sa maikling oras, at hindi niya kailangang mag-struggle na makita yung ginagawa niya because by wearing that scratch or dirty face shield, nagkaroon siya ng better vision. These are actually soon. Kasi ginawa nila to, nagawa niya to. No? And certain, sure siya nagawa niya. Na-encounter niya yung consequence na yun. And positive kasi added thing sa pagkatao niya or something that has been added to his task na hindi niya kailangan na ma-encounter yung mga problems or difficulties in doing the job. That's the reason why, even though these consequences can be said that they are trivial or they are insignificant as compared to having an injury or being reprimanded, ay mas pinili niya, he has chosen the at-risk behavior by doing that. So, ngayon, may na-encounter tayong mga trabahador. At sa tingin natin, bakit pa ulit-ulit nilang ginagawa? Tanungin natin. Baka kasi mas nangibabaw yung consequences na na-enjoy nila kumpara doon sa negative consequences dahil hindi naman sigurado kung kailan mangyayari. Ngayon, komportable na ba tayo na masabi na dahil lang soon, certain, and positive, itong mga consequences tayo, mananahimik na lang tayo, or we will just be settling for this? No. The main task here is, after knowing the at-risk behavior and what are the antecedents that triggered it, as well as the powerful consequences, dapat natin gawin ay isolve natin yung problema by correcting or preventing the antecedents that triggered the behavior. Kasi yung at-risk behavior na yun nangyari yun kasi may mga antecedents na nangyari before the behavior occurred. So what are those things? Sabi kanina kasi walang face shield na available at sira-sira kanina. Dapat meron siya available face shield agad. Kung yung face shield na yun ay located sa workstation, hindi niya kailangan maghanap. So hindi siya mauubusan, wala siyang dahilan. At the end, ang principle natin dito is wala siyang magiging dahilan kung bakit niya ginawa yung at-risk behavior na yun. So if there's an availability of new face shield, if there is a face shield located near the workstation, there are visible signages kaya pwedeng hindi niya pwedeng sabihin that I don't know about it, or the signage is not available or it's not clear. Visible signages will answer that. You need to review the face and eye injuries during safety meetings para wala silang dahilan para sabihin na ay hindi naman actually nangyayari yung injury na yun. Baka at sabihin ng iba, ay hindi naman nag-i-exist talaga yung mga injuries na sa tagal ko ba naman dito, hindi naman nangyayari yan. So review the face and eye injuries during safety meetings so everyone knows about the implications of these injuries. And remind people to wear face shield before commencing the job. So meron ka ng pauna. There is a what you call this, a reminder or something that will trigger a safe behavior by not allowing him to do that at-risk behavior. By reminding people, that's the reason why it's very important that particular supervision in the hierarchy of our controls. One of the things is that there should be proper that ITIS, there's a proper information, there's a training, instruction, peer instruction, and supervision, because those things will remind people to do what they need to do before starting the job. And with regards to the consequences, one of the very good example of the consequence after you came to know the at-risk behavior is to provide feedback. Ito kasi yung kadalasan nakakalimutan natin. When we are doing some audit, when we are doing some inspection, very seldom that we are spending time to provide feedback. Workers need to know what they're doing to improve. Hindi pa pwedeng sita ka na, ay, baba ka dito. Or go down. Or why are you doing this? Why are you doing... People may not even know that they're doing wrong. There's a level of perception. May nabasa ko kanina nag-comment, perception of risk. Okay? Hindi niya alam na ginawa niya mali. Kasi una niyang trabaho, ito ang ginagawa niya. Kaya nga, di ba, last week, 2 weeks ago, tinuro ni Sir Raul yung human error. No? Na may tinatawag tayo na slip and trip errors, may tinatawag na rule-based error at saka knowledge-based error. Kasi sa unang trabaho niya, yun ang ginagawa niya. So wala sa kanya na perception na mali yun. Problem is that we tend to focus on the negative thing that the person did, but we don't have time to tell the person or educate the person na dapat ganito gawin mo. Sa susunod, ganito ang gawin mo. Kasi ganito mangyayari sa'yo. So the person will know, in the first place, the right to know, the person knows that he did something wrong. The workers rarely receive feedback about their performance. Isa ako sa mga tao guilty ako no? Kahit sa mga audit, sa mga inspection, meron ito ang nagiging comment ng management sa atin lagi na lang pag nagkakaroon tayo inspection, yung mga non-conformances at saka mga findings, yung mga hindi ginawa. Hindi natin sinusulat kung ano yung mga nagawa nila. Kasi nga, mahabang report yun. Imagine mo, kung lahat na lang ng mga ginawa nilang tama, isusulat mo, haba. Di ba? Sobra na yon. So, ang point ko doon is, may perception pa rin ng management na ganito no? Ito naman naririnig ko sa ibang management na, why do we need to highlight what they are doing right? Where in fact, that is their responsibility to do it right in the first place. Oo, ando doon na responsable sila na gawin yung tama, pero as a human being, kahit ikaw ay on the personal basis, kahit sa pamilya mo, kahit ginagawa mo yung tama, di ba masarap na makita nila or mapansin nila na ginagawa mo yung tama. And that, unfortunately, these are not always being seen. I myself, hindi ako isa ako sa mga guilty dito sa aspetong ito. No? Siguro masyado na tayong busy sa trabaho na na-overlook na natin to. But it's very important. Sabi nga nila, ang trabahador hindi naman nagtatagal sa isang trabaho dahil lang sa sahod. Most of the time, people stays at work because they're being recognized. Kasi nakikita yung trabaho nila. And sometimes that is more important. That particular consequence is more important that results for staying the person at work. So feedback provides, or before the injury, not only supplies new positive consequence, kasi nabibigay ka sa kanila ng positive consequence, nabibigay mo sa kanila kung anong dapat nilang gawin. And that is a positive consequence. Kasi feedback is also a positive consequence. Nagpo-provide ka rin sa kanila ng bagong antecedents to trigger safe behavior, gaya ang sabi ko, tulad kanina, dun sa video natin, kung di niya pa ma-provide yung safety glasses, yung pang-hold sa ilong para hindi mahulog, at wala pa yung safety, yung face shield, pero yun yung hiningi niya as an assurance, yung observer kanina, na habang hindi kita pa binibigyan niya itong mga to, yung mga PPE na to, wag mo munang tanggalin yung safety glasses mo habang nagtatrabaho ka. So the feedback provides antecedents to trigger safe behavior. So the most powerful feedback must be soon. So kadalasan ito pa nagiging problema natin, no? Masyado tayong busy, dami nating tinatrabaho, lahat na lang binigay sa atin. Ang nangyayari, gusto natin tapusin agad yung inspection or yung audit natin. Okay? Sa nangyayari, hindi natin lahat natututukan. We are not giving the right amount of time, the quality time as far as doing the right thing is concerned. So, minsan yung feedback, hindi na agad natin nabibigay. Kumbaga minsan, yung nagkaroon ng inspection, for example, today. Minsan, ang report lumalabas after a week, after 2 weeks. Kasi busy na tayo natatabunan ng trabaho. Remember, feedback are both verbal and written. Kailangan doon sa panahon na nakita mo siya, magbigay ka ng feedback sa kanya. Ito yung magandang nakita ko sa iyo. Sinuot mo to, ginawa mo to. Kaya lang, may mga bagay ka rin na hindi ginawa. So like in any kind of politicizing, or you can say diplomatic way of dealing with things, di ba, ayaw mo naman na maumpisahan na negative agad kahit sa audit, di ba? Pag binibigyan tayo ng mga audit findings, inuuna yung noteworthy effort, yung mga bagay na magaganda natin ginawa. Saka na lang hinuhuli yung mga findings. Kasi what will happen is that kapag negative agad, there is a tendency of the human being to be defensive. So ayaw niya agad marinig yun. Gusto niya marinig yung mga bagay. So para nakukuha mo yung attention niya at nakukuha mo yung suporta niya kasi hindi lang pala ito tumitingin sa mali. Nakita niya rin pala na gumawa ako. Okay? Now, in order for us to sustain, kasi nabago mo na yung antecedent para maging safe na yung behavior niya. Kasi kinorek mo na yung mga naunang antecedent na nakita mo. At nag-provide ka ng feedback. And how are we going to sustain that para hindi tayo babalik sa square one, na babalik tayo ulit sa ginawa niyang at-risk behavior? There's what we call reinforcement. Di ba kahit sa structural engineering, pag sinabing reinforcement, pinapatibay natin, we are enhancing the strength. So in this case, we are trying to enhance the consequence in order for us to sustain the safe behavior. So reinforcement is used to help increase the probability that a specific behavior will occur in the future by delivering or removing a stimulus immediately after behavior. Bakit sinabing delivering or removing? There are two kinds of reinforcement. One is positive reinforcement. It is actually presenting a motivating stimulus to the person after the desired behavior is exhibited, making the behavior more likely to happen in the future. Nagdadagdag ka. For example, yung awards, may recognition, these are all positive reinforcement. Okay? Kasi dinadagdag mo yun na wala naman nung una. Kaya tinawag siyang positive. Okay? And the objective of this is to reinforce that particular behavior. However, there is also what you call negative reinforcement. What is the negative reinforcement? It occurs when a certain stimulus is removed after behavior is exhibited, and the likelihood of the particular behavior occurring again in the future is increased because of removing, avoiding the negative consequence. So, dalawa yun, no? Either tanggalin mo, which is a negative reinforcement, or idagdag mo, or you will add on to that to make it for the positive reinforcement. Both of these are reinforcement. Take note, the objective of these two are the same. The only difference is that one is being added and the other one is being removed. Okay, what are these things? An example is like this. Your outcome or your objective is to increase the sales. By adding monetary bonus, extra vacation, verbal verbal recognition or praise, um, or adding more people underneath that person to assist that person is a positive reinforcement. So the outcome of that is to increase the sales. However, by also reducing the time to commute or less the stress in altering employee hours, reduce the environmental factors like noise or lack of privacy, or reducing the workload. You will see the wording here, add for the positive reinforcement, and negative reinforcement are reduce, reduce, reduce. These are all things that will also both result to an increase in sale. So parehas ito, pwede mong gamitin either positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. With regards to safety, pwede mong i-apply ito. At the end, your objective is to sustain the safe behavior. Kasi hindi ito one-time deal. The behavior-based safety is a very meticulous process. Paulit-ulit mo itong ginagawa. Kasi nga, remember, babalik tayo dun sa attitude, behavior, culture link. Pag binago mo kasi yung behavior ng tao, mababago mo yung attitude ng tao. At since ang kultura ay binubuo ng bawat isa, so pag nabago mo yung attitude, nabago mo rin yung kultura. And culture is not an overnight thing to do. Changing of culture is not something that can be done overnight. Normally, it takes less than a year or 1.5 years to happen. So paulit-ulit ito nangyayari. Magugulat ka bakit pansinin mo tayo na lang mga Pilipino, when we are outside of our country, we are being modeled as someone na law-abiding. Wala ka nakarinig sa UAE, bihirang-bihira ka makarinig sa UAE na nag-overspeed ang isang Pilipino or matigas ang ulo ng Pilipino na hindi sumunod ang Pilipino. Kahit siguro sa ibang bansa, not only in the UAE, sa ibang bansa. Pero bakit pagdating na nasa Pilipinas na, the same na tao pinag-uusapan natin, pagdating sa Pilipinas, hindi niya magawa. Okay? Kasi, yun yung idea na, yung kultura. Iba kasi yung kultura na apektuhan kasi yung behavior ng tao. So, but as time passes by, if that particular behavior natin nasa abroad, bitbitin natin yan pag uwi natin ng Pilipinas, huwag tayong magpapa-impluensya kung ano may nasa paligid natin. Let our behavior here influence the attitude and the culture of the Philippines. Mababago yung kultura ng Pilipinas. Okay? So, how are we going to do that? How are we going to do the ABC analysis or the antecedent behavior and consequence analysis? First, we need to identify what are the at-risk behavior. Ano ba yung mga behavior na naglalagay sa alanganin ng isang tao? Then after that, what are the antecedents? What triggers this at-risk behavior? Bakit ba mas pinipili ng tao na gawin yun? Next is, what are the consequences of that at-risk behavior? It is both negative and positive consequences. Then identify the power of consequences using the time, certainty, and significance. Evaluate those consequences like what we did. So you can understand why the person decided to go and decided to take that at-risk behavior. Saka mo ngayon baguhin yung mga antecedents na yon na nagtitrigger ng at-risk behavior. So after knowing the power of consequences, i-define mo na ngayon ano ba yung gusto mong safe behavior. Kasi alam mo na yung at-risk eh. Ano ba yung dapat niyang ginawa? Like for example, use of ladder. Use of ladder is a behavior. Hindi siya positive, hindi siya unsafe or hindi siya safe, hindi siya at risk. Basta ginamit niya lang yung ladder. Ginamit niya ng may sira or madulas o at risk behavior 'yon, di ba? Ngayon gusto mo ngayon baguhin 'yon. I-define mo ngayon. Use of ladder, use of safe ladder. Use of ladder safety. You need to define that. Ano ba yung interpretation natin ng safe? Paano mo masasabihin na safe yung use of ladder? Doon yung papasok later on, in one of the slides later on. You need to define the safe behavior. Kasi minsan yun ang mali eh. May sarili tayong perception. Yung safe sa'yo, maaaring hindi safe sa akin. That's the reason why after defining or identifying the safe behavior, you need to define what makes that behavior safe. Pag ba nagsuot ako ng gloves, kahit anong gloves, safe na ba yun? Or you need to be very specific. What type of gloves ang kailangan ko isuot para maging safe siya? That is how you define safe behavior. So after knowing the safe behavior, define what are the antecedents that will trigger safe behavior. Normally, ito yung kabaligtaran ng mga antecedents na nakita mo nung ginagawa niya yung at-risk behavior. And last but not the least, list the new consequences that normally supports the safe behavior. Normally, these are soon, certain, and positive, like on-spot verbal feedback. Sinabi mo agad sa kanya, hindi mo na inantay. Written feedback based on your report. Kasi kailangan mong i-dokumento eh. So, kailangan mo magsulat na report. Or tracking the percentage of safe workers. So, remember, sabi nga ni Peter Drucker, things that you cannot measure cannot be changed or enhanced or improved. I'm not exactly sure the wording of
Manage.
Sorry. Thank you very much, sir. So, in that particular case, you will notice behavior is an observable act and should be measurable para ma-appreciate ng tao kung ginagawa niya ba or nami-meet niya ba yung objective mo. Okay? So it should be regular and consistent. Hindi pa pwedeng ngayon magko-conduct tayo, bukas makalawa hindi. Kaya 'di ba kahit naman sa tao, kahit naman sa personal, kahit sa pamilya. Pag once in a blue moon mo ginagawa, parang hindi ka panipaniwala. Parang minsan magdadalawang isip ka pa eh. Bakit niya ginagawa yun? Ba't ngayon lang? Pero di ba kapag lagi niya ginagawa, mas doon yung convincing aspect na kasi yun yung gusto niya. Yung consistency, yung yung reason kung bakit niya ginagawa, meron siyang gustong marating. Gusto niyang, I exactly forgot the exact word for that. Perseverance. Persevere yung tao kaya niya paulit-ulit yung ginagawa yun. So ganun din naman sa behavior-based safety. Now the question is, sa dami ng mga at-risk behavior na nakikita mo sa trabaho mo, paano mo malalaman kung ano yung dapat mong i-focus? Kasi kailangan maging realistic din tayo eh. Hindi natin lahat kaya. No? Paano natin malalaman na ito ang dapat kong pagtuunan ng pansin? No? So therefore, what we need to have is that there should be an inventory of behaviors that are critical. Take note of this. Critical and significant. And normally, it is based on data. Ano tong data na to? Ito yung incident reports na ni-raise. Ito yung resulta ng risk assessment mo. Ito yung resulta ng mga safety meetings mo na may lumabas na ganitong mga problema. These are all founded by data. And to identify the content of your inventory as far as behaviors are concerned, These are the areas where you can focus to identify. So this is the initial step. Identify or obtain this particular information. Okay? So the purpose of this inventory is to provide parameters for observer, keeping them the standard and clear picture of what to look for. Kasi sabi ko ng ganun, napakadami, no? Napakadami ng magkakaibang activities ang ginagawa ng tao. Sa bawat activity, napakaraming behavior ang involved. For example, pagsasalin lang ng gasolina sa isang or pagsasalin lang ng isang chemical from one container to another. Ang daming behavior na concern doon eh. Yung pagsusuot ng PPE ng glasses niya. Isang behavior yun. Act yun eh. Pag-wear niya ng safety guard, ng apron o kaya ng overall, another behavior yun. Yung paglalagay niya na sa tamang, ng paglalagay niya ng siphon o ng imbudo o yung funnel para hindi matapon. Another behavior yun. Paglalagay niya ng secondary containment para hindi matapon sa lapag kung sakaling mag-spill over yung ano. Another behavior yun. Remember, behavior is an act or say or what the person say. So, isang activity pa lang, ang dami ng behavior na involved. No? So, paano mo ngayon yung mapofocus? So, the inventory will set you parameters on what are the things to look for. It also serves as a guideline for measurement. Sabi ko nga, pwede mo makuha yung percentage safe eh. To measure gaano karami yung sumusunod dito sa mga na-define ko na safe behavior. So whether a behavior is safe or at risk. So paano ba kinakalculate yun? May tinatawag na percentage total safe. No? Ang ginagawa lang naman is just a numerical sum. Meron kang listahan, no? Ipapakita ko yan later. May listahan ka ng mga safe behavior. Tapos pupunta ka doon sa lugar na yon, titingnan mo, ilan ba dito sumusunod o hindi. Bibilangin mo siya, ilan yung sumusunod, hindi yung sumusunod. So, total safe is percentage na ilan ang safe, tapos overall ng safe tsaka unsafe or at risk. No? So, yun yung percentage. So, na-measure mo siya. And this also serves as a tool for training employees kasi nga dito pumapasok ang tinatawag na training needs analysis. No? Kapag hindi okay yung tao, normally ang ating assistance for that to improve the person is to send him for training. So that is also one way for us to identify what are the specific type of training that we can give to the person as far as the improvement of behavior is concerned. So these are the stages of the behavior selection. So pag mamimili ka ng select ng behavior, una ito. There should be an identification. So sabi ko nga ganon, based on accident reports, risk assessment, legal requirements, all data that will lead you for different type of behaviors. Kasi hindi lang pa pwede tayo umasa sa accident report. As we all know, accident report is a lagging indicator. So kapag unreported or unaccounted yung mga ginagawa at hindi nire-report, hindi mo rin yan makaka-capture sa identification mo. No? Katulad din ng for illnesses, hindi naman lagi may nagkakasakit. O maaaring katulad nito nangyari sa COVID-19, yung iba hindi naman nire-report. Kasi ayaw mag-absent, ayaw mabawasan, or for whatever reason. So, marami kang aspeto na dapat tingnan or different sources of data that you can look for or you can use to identify the behavior. And after identifying the behavior, you need to define. Here, you need to be very specific. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina. Hindi lang basta sapat na use of shackles for lifting operation. Anong shackle ang gagamitin mo or anong pang parameters na dapat mong i-check pagka naggagamit ka ng shackle or nang gumagamit ka ng overhead crane? You need to be very specific kasi yun yung isusulat mo. This is a guideline for consistency for the observers to create working document for the definition. Sabi ko nga kasi, iba-iba yung observer mo. Yung perceptions ng bawat isa ay magkakaiba. So to make them uniform, pag tiningnan nila, safe ba itong paggamit ng gloves na ito, pare-parehas ang tinitingnan nila. And that is based on the definition that you will place in your inventory. I'll give you an example of what will happen if this particular, I think this is related to, because I'm trying to look for that. Okay. This is how, in that particular organization, how they define, or sorry, how they identify and define the behavior. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you guys. This is Pat Garnett from corporate. She's interested in a process.
Please don't stop on my account.
Oh, welcome. Feel free to join right in. We ask only that everyone participate.
Okay, here. Our next incident is 99-012.
Yeah, you and I were both there for that one, weren't we, Donna? Okay, let's see. The report says while he was overhauling a pump, the mechanic's wrench slipped off a bolt, causing him to strike his hand on a sharp corner, causing him to scrape his knuckles.
What were the behaviors?
All it says here is that the worker should have avoided striking his hand on the sharp corner.
I'm curious. What's the corrective action?
Guess what? It says the worker should
Be more careful.
Yeah, look, folks, one day we'll be able to get our investigators to list the behavior on their accident reports. Luckily, our subcommittee took a closer look at the accident to find the behaviors. Donna, what'd you guys find out?
Okay, a mechanic was overhauling a pump. He used a vise to hold the piping assembly in place. He was loosening the nuts on the piping assembly using an opened-end wrench. The wrench slipped off the nut and he hit his hand on a sharp corner. He wasn't wearing gloves.
All right. Now, what were the behaviors?
using an open-end wrench. A box-end wrench wouldn't have slipped.
Oh, and not wearing gloves. I mean, if he'd been wearing leather gloves, he would have reduced the injury.
Where does paying attention fit in? Like knowing where his hand was in proximity to the sharp corner?
You know, I think you're onto something there. The thing is, though, that paying attention is difficult to observe. What would be the observable act?
Hand position? Or like watching hands? I mean, it sounds like his hand was too close to the sharp corner.
There you go.
Hey, that's good. Sign her up. We could use the help.
Okay.
So you will notice here that there is actually a meeting that is being conducted, and those people review the outcome of the incident or accident report. So hindi lang sapat na na-define yung mga corrective and preventive actions mo after the investigation of your accident. It is being reviewed by a committee. And this committee are knowledgeable with regards to the activity. So, kung mapapansin ninyo, yung sinasabi ng what are the behaviors, these are all the step-by-step actions that have been taken by the person during the course of the incident. So, walang pinakaiba itong behavior-based safety sa paggawa natin ng incident-accident investigation. Kailangan mo alamin kung anong ginagawa ng tao. And yung ginagawa ng tao is nothing but the behavior. Now, after knowing what are the behaviors, but take note of this, you need to correct these behaviors. It's not like you just need to identify them. If you notice, their identification of corrective actions are observable and specific. When someone, when Pat, that yung babae, suggested about paying attention, paano mo masasabi na yung tao ay nagpe-pay attention? Something that should be observable. And she suggested na yung position ng kamay. So when you are identifying a behavior, dapat observable siya. Hindi siya subjective. Objective dapat siya. Nakikita mo siya, kaya mo siyang i-evaluate. And it should be specific. Okay? So, let us go to the stages of the observation. Paano ba ginagawa ang observation? First, is you need to go to the action. Meaning, kapag ikaw ay, katulad kanina, kung natatandaan ninyo, yung unang video natin na kung saan nakita yung tao hindi nagsusuot ng safety glasses at ng face shield, may observer na pumunta sa kanya and tinanong siya kung bakit niya ginagawa yon. So when you are trying to do an observation using a behavior-based safety approach, first is you need to introduce yourself to the person. This is different from the usual inspection kasi inspection, kadalasan ang negative notion, ang negative effect nun is para ka nag-i-spy dun sa tao, naghahanap ka ng mali niya. No? Hindi ganun ang behavior-based safety. Ang behavior-based safety, approach mo yung tao, sasabihin mo sa kanya na proseso ito ng observation. Titingnan ko kung paano mo ginagawa yung trabaho mo. Hindi ko ilalagay ang pangalan mo rito. This is no name observation. I just wanted to see whether the task is being done or how the task is being done. At panonoorin niya lang. Okay? And later on, after nun, so i-introduce mo yung sarili mo, sasabihin mo kung sino ka, para saan yung purpose na yon. Tapos, doon mo ngayon, yung next step is observe openly. Observe openly, meaning, pabayaan mo lang. Tingnan mo lang kung paano ginagawa niya. Pero kung sakaling meron siyang unsafe agad na sa palagay mo, ay ma-danger agad or merong risk talaga na ma-aksidente siya, itigil mo, no? Huwag ka lang manood, no? Minsan yun ang maling pagkakaintindi dito sa behavior-based safety. Sabi kasi, observe openly. Kaya mapuputol na yung kamay, observe openly pa rin, no? Hindi. Observe openly when everything is still under control. Kung may minor lang naman ang ginagawa na pagkakamali, still continue to observe. Then after that, do a situation-centered observation. Ano yung sabihin ng situation-centered? Situation-centered means you are observing the person as if you don't know the process. Kung ikaw ay baguhan, di ba, sa isang trabaho, ando doon yung attention mo kasi hindi mo naiintindihan. So your focus is there because you wanted to understand the subject matter. The same principle applies in behavior-based safety. Do not assume and presume that you know already the task. As if you don't know. Kasi the more that you, gaya din naman, di ba, sabi nila, pagka mas madali daw turuan yung mga hindi pa marunong magmaneho kumpara sa marunong magmaneho kasi meron ng kinasanayan eh. The same principle goes here. Assume that empty, blank, wala kang alam. Ina-evaluate mo yung sitwasyon. Then after that, go to an inventory-centered observation. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Bit mo dito sa observation na to yung nagawa mo lang inventory ng behavior. Titingnan mo ngayon doon mo ngayon i-check. Ginawa niya ba to? For that particular task or activity, ginawa niya ba to? Hindi niya to ginawa. So, in order for you to document that particular observation. So, ibig sabihin, hinayaan mo siyang, so to summarize, you need to go to the action, hindi yung sa opisina mo lang ginagawa or nagkatamaran, alam mo naman, pamilyar ka naman doon sa ginagawa ng tao, is isusulat mo na lang yung sa report mo. No? So, observe openly, do a situation-centered observation, meaning assume that you don't know anything at all, and last but not the least, record your observation using the inventory checklist or inventory list that you have developed for the safe behavior. Ginawa niya ba yon o hindi? Now, after the observation, provide feedback. Verbal feedback. Balikan mo ngayon yung tao. Sabihin mo, eto yung mga napansin ko sa ginawa mo. Una, i-highlight mo kung ano yung maganda niyang ginawa or ano yung ginawa niyang tama. Nag-wear siya ng PPE, sumunod siya sa lockout-tagout procedure, kung ano man yung mga ginawa niya na tama, i-highlight mo kasi doon mo makukuha yung respeto at attention ng tao. Okay? Then after that, right, sabihin mo sa kanya, after nun, sabihin mo na ngayon na eto naman yung mga nakita ko na dapat mong ginawa. So, makukuha mo yung attention niya kasi hindi lang negative yung approach mo. positive sorry, positive consequence, positive positive reinforcement, no? Then after that, sabi mo sa kanya, hindi ko susulat ang pangalan mo ha, pero isusulat ko kung ano yung mga nakita ko dito. Tanungin mo rin sa kanya, bakit mo ba ginawa yun? No? During the feedback process, ask the person, bakit mo ginawa yun? Bakit mo hindi sinunod yun? Maaaring may dahilan siya, no? Logical or illogical, may dahilan siya. Kung sa palagay mo, may bearing, and most of the time, 99.999%, those things that are being, or those reasons why the person did that are normally system-based, management-based. Dito na pumapasok yung tinuro ni Sir Raul last time about the root cause. Kasi hindi na kontrolado ng tao. Like for example, kahit anong gawin niyang maayos na trabaho dun sa equipment, kung yung equipment hindi naman matino, hindi naman na walang maintenance, or may problema dun sa makina, baliwala. Okay? Walang enough resources na binigay, or kahit yung tao, alam niya or gusto niyang gawin yung tama, hindi naman siya binigyan ng training. Paano niya gagawin yung tama? So, these are what we call barriers. These are all system-based or management issues that the person, okay, has no control at all. So, isusulat mo ngayon yun. Write comments. Report yun eh. Turn in that paperwork dun sa committee kaninang nakita natin kasi pag-aaralan nila yun eh. Sila ngayon mag-aaral. Ano ba yung mga naging dahilan ba't ginawa to? And conduct problem-solving meetings. So dito napapasok yung tinatawag na root cause analysis. Bakit nila ginawa to? Then that's the time you will not only address the behavior of the person, but you're also addressing the system issues. Kasi ito yung mga kritiko or the critic of behavior-based safety saying that not everything is being controlled by human beings. So what about the management, the leadership, all these issues, the equipment, lahat ng ito, the materials being used, these are not all being controlled by human beings. So kung behavior lang ng tao ang concern mo sa behavior-based safety, failure yun. So it means that part of the behavior-based safety is also identifying the necessary corrections to the system. I will cite you an example here wherein ito yung epekto ng hindi pagsunod doon sa procedure na ginawa na sinabi natin about stages of observation and feedback. I wanted to share this with you.
Especially when he ignores the steps of the observation and feedback process.
Where is everybody? Oh, man, they must be at lunch. Well, I'm just going to have to wait for something. Hey, there's somebody. Where's he going with that trash can? Well, it doesn't look safe. Now, let's see here. It would be, eyes on path. That's it, eyes on path. There. I marked it at risk. Hey, you know you're really at risk. You're going to hurt yourself. You keep your eyes on the path.
She almost hit me with a fork.
Hey, you guys going to lunch already? I'll catch up with you later. And you're not wearing gloves. You need gloves. And next time, use a dolly. Hey, Mike, listen, I finished this data sheet. Would you see that Jake gets it? Thanks. I got to get going.
Hey, Nate. So where are the comments that the at-risk behaviors you marked?
How well did Nate follow the steps of observation and feedback?
Okay. You'll notice, hindi sinunod ni Nate yung procedure. Hindi siya pumunta kung saan man nagtatrabaho yung mga tao. Pumunta siya nang walang tao. He filled out the inventory without actually looking at the actual job. He just assumed that he knows the job. He assumed that the person is doing it. He's familiar with the area, but he doesn't know exactly what the task is. Nung nakita niya na yung taong may bitbit ng basurahan, trash can, ay papalapit sa kanya at merong forklift na nasa likod noon, na pwede niyang pinahinto agad kasi nga that is a close call or that a near very critical near miss, a very non-dangerous condition, hindi niya ginawa, no? Tapos instead na kausapin niya ng matino yung tao, is sinigawan niya lang. Hindi niya pinansin niya na walang safety gloves, pero hindi niya nakita na meron namang suot na helmet yung tao na, and you will see, kausap siya ng tao, nagre-reason out yung tao, tapos bigla na lang niyang nag-divert doon sa ibang, so wala siyang focus or attention doon sa observation niya. And the report that has been provided, walang ganong enough information. So anong gagawin niya yon? So that the report that will be passed on will be useless pagdating na nakarating ito doon sa committee. Kasi wala namang mapipiga or there's no significant or essential information that can be obtained from that report. Okay? So, number one, yung kapag nawalan na ka ng respeto or nawalan na respeto din sa'yo yung so hindi ka makakuha ng maayos na feedback sa kanila. And you will notice there was no positive feedback that has been provided. So these are the systematic steps to remove the barrier. First is you need to identify the problem, and the problem are those examples or those incidents that happen. Then use a root cause analysis to identify the root causes. Either you use the fishbone diagram, or you use the FIMEA or failure mode effect analysis. You can make use also fault tree analysis. At the end, the objective here is that you identify the root cause. Kasi hindi naman lahat ng mga dahilan ay madali mo mag-solve, no? And this behavior-based safety requires management support from the start. Hindi magkakaroon ng meeting na ganyan kung hindi inaalaw ng management, no? Kasi nauubos lang yung oras nila ng pagmi-meeting at maghahanap ng problema, no? So kung yung management from the start, there was no commitment and leadership with regards to this behavior-based approach, baliwala. So mapapansin niyo na at the end bumabalik pa rin doon sa central core ng ISO 45001 na hindi lang sapat ng merong involvement, kasi yung feedback process is an involvement process of the employees. Nakukuha mo yung sentimiento or the sentiments of the people by reasoning out during the observation process. But more than that, there is also a commitment and leadership from the management. If those things are not in place, then it will be useless. Then, after identifying the root causes, then generate the possible solutions. Okay? As I said, this is like an incident-accident investigation. You need to define the possible solution. Okay? And the solution statement should be very specific. As I said, hindi lang sapat na sabihin mo na you need to wear hard hat or you need to wear safety shoes. If there is a specific aspect of safety shoes, like it should be slip resistant or non-conductive kasi electrical connection may flammable gas area yon, you need to be very specific and develop an action plan. Because kapag hindi ito na-monitor at hindi ito nagawa, ang mangyayari, like in any kind of feedback system or yung suggestion boxes na ginagawa ng mga kumpanya, pagka hindi nabigyan ng feedback yung mga tao, mawawalan silang gana sumunod. Kasi sabihin nila, ay papel lang naman yan. Sa umpisa lang naman yan. In the Philippines, they call that ningas kugon, right? Sa umpisa lang yan. No? So, unfortunately, yun yung reality. No? So, thank you very much for listening. I-stop ko na po ito, no? To have some
Okay.
I hope na naintindihan po ninyo.
Okay po, sir. Actually, we have some questions from the group chat from Mr. Mirza. First is, how general is the term observation? It mean different to different people, and it may result in totally different outcomes in terms of hazard and safe system of work.
Okay, that's the reason why when you are defining the safe behavior prior to observation, as I said, before you conduct an observation, you should have already an inventory of safe behavior. And this is the outcome of the inventory is the result of identifying the safe behavior and defining the safe behavior. As I said, like what he said, different people may have different perceptions. The safe aspect of that particular activity may be different from one person to another. That's the reason why during the course of identification and definition of safe behavior, you need to be very specific so that you have commonality, you have common understanding. When I say that you need to wear safety goggles, you need to wear safety goggles in a manner that is very specific so that on that particular activity, take note, for that particular activity. So safety goggles for a different activity may not be the same. Both may be the same safe behavior, wearing of safe goggles. But the specificity or the specific aspect of wearing the safety goggles is different depending on the type of activity because that is where that he said hazard and that safe systems of work comes in. So the safety goggles may not be so strict for what you call this for an activity that may be probably concerning what you call this concerning about dust. But if you are handling chemicals, you are more stringent to that. So that's the main concern. You need to define and very specific what do you mean by that particular safe behavior. For that particular act, what do you mean by that? I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, sir. There's also a follow-up question. What to do to a person who turned the deaf ear and even after many corrections keep on doing the same violations?
Okay. Um, as I defined earlier, I don't know whether kasi maaga ko siyang diniscuss, no? Pero I don't know whether um, naabutan niya yun, no? He was able to catch up that part. I defined the key variables of human behavior. And in that, one of the aspect is personality. Okay? That's the reason why I said from the start, in the hiring process, HR should be very specific or should be very meticulous in hiring the people. Kapag sakit ng ulo agad yan from the start, wag mong i-hire. And makikita yan ng HR because they have methodologies or tools kung yung tao ay sakit sa ulo. I'm not saying na he's doing that violation because on purpose, but as I said, there are reasons that are beyond the norm or the control of the management. With all the things being said about behavior-based safety, and as I said, hindi ito one-time deal, no, one-shot deal. This requires certain lot of time, effort, resources. Kasi yung i-define mo lang kung ano yung mga safe behavior sa bawat task, hindi ganun kadali. And to follow up, kasi hindi lang isang beses niya gagawin yung trabaho yun, no? Pag paulit-ulit niyang ginagawa at nasanayan niya, nade-develop yung tinatawag nga natin ng change behavior at maapektuhan yung kanyang attitude. Pero hindi po pwede na kinorek mo ngayon, expect mo na paulit-ulit, gaya din naman ng bakit tayo panay paulit-ulit na may mga signages na nakalagay sa kalsada, pero bakit gano'n, no? Pareha-parehas pa rin, meron pa rin mga hindi nagsusuot ng safety belt, seat belt. May penalty na, may no? So there are different ways for us to reinforce. No, there is a negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. So at the end, kapag ginawa na lahat at hindi pa rin siya sumunod, that's the reason why there is what you call a part of our uh, consequence is meron tayong mga disciplinary actions. Diba? It may sound negative reinforcement, but that is what we have been saying. If the goal is to reach, in order for us to reach that particular goal, we have ways of doing that. Kung hindi siya in Tagalog, may sinasabi nila na kung hindi kita madaasa sa santong dasalan, doon na sa santong paspasan. No? Kasi if you have resorted with all the necessary methodologies for you to change your behavior and still you opted to go for a violation, not even a human error, no? Not even a human error, it's a violation. That means there's something wrong about that person. Now, I hope nasagot ko siya.
Thank you po. We have a question from AG Esturco. Can BBS address the 2% unpreventable accident according to Heinrich?
Actually, there is no such thing as 100% proof that a methodology will prevent an accident. Okay? And like what I said, not everything is about human being. And that's the reason why most of the critics of this behavior-based safety saying that hindi lang tao dapat ang kinokorek natin, pati yung sistema, pati yung management. Kasi kung wala silang suporta at walang sistema, eh baliwala, no? So there's no 100% proof of doing that. And actually, that's the reason why we have risk assessment, diba? In our risk assessment, we always end up with residual risk. Residual risk. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng residual risk? Kahit anong tiga mo, kahit anong gawin mong controls o control measure ang ilagay mo, may matitira at matitira pa ring risk. Because that is inherent, intrinsic, okay? Intrinsic to the human being, intrinsic to the parts of work. Like for example, kahit bago yung makina mo, bagong-bago yan, ha? May risk involved yan. Kahit bagong tayo yung building mo, may risk involved yan. So therefore, there's no such thing as zero risk. That's the reason we're trying to manage the risk. So knowing the residual risk, wala ding way para ma-zero out natin yung idea na walang aksidente. What we need to do is to ensure that all the controls that are in place are managing the risk to the lowest level. Ano yung lowest level? Yun yung residual risk na pinroject mo dun sa risk assessment mo. Kasi dun sa residual risk na nilagay mo sa risk assessment, yun yung nagkasunduan nyo ng management na up to that level, acceptable yung risk na yon sa organization. And when that level of acceptability is encountered by the organization, it means that anything that will happen within the limit of that level of risk is what you call is amenable or acceptable as far as tolerable. You can say tolerable as far as the management is concerned. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, thank you po. Last two questions po as we are over time na po. How important is engineering qualification in OHS? As many safety professionals are not engineers, is it required to have a team of safety officers and engineers to make observations and job hazard analysis before developing a safe system of work?
If you will consider the analytical aspect of the analysis, probably you may require someone who's technical, not necessarily an engineer, someone who's a mathematician, a data scientist, someone who knows the statistics. But at the end of the day, it is not actually what the person has as far as individuality is concerned. No? Sorry, with regards to the group effort as far as the team is concerned. No? That's why it's called the team. You may be requiring technical people, yes, but not necessarily an engineer. If you'll go back in quality management system, and those who have knowledge about lean management or Six Sigma management, part of that is you are identifying um, cause and effect as well. And typically, they use analytical principles in order to identify. Sa ano po kasi, sa quality management system, there is what we call in the prioritization, which is very important in this particular aspect of behavior-based safety kasi you need to limit the number of behaviors that you need to focus on. Sa Lean Six Sigma kasi, meron tinatawag na Pareto analysis. No? Pareto is, Mr. Pareto is a Italian statistician and economist who postulated that uh, the 80% of the effect comes from 20% of the causes. Yung tinatawag ng 80-20. So may tinatawag siya 80-20 na yun, na ibig sabihin, yung 80% na naging epekto ay dahil sa 20% ng naging cause. So pagka gumawa ka ng Pareto analysis, makikita mo na ilan ba dito sa mga cause na to, which are your at-risk behavior, ang nagko-contribute na 80% ng aksidente. And that is your effect. Again, the 80-20 of Pareto analysis says that 20% of the causes results to 80% of the effect. So kung malalaman mo yung 20% na ito na significant na unsafe behavior or sorry, at-risk behavior, malilimit mo yung dami ng ano mo, no? Malilimit mo yung dami ng aksidente mo, which is your effect. So that requires analytical reasoning and analytical approach. No? So that is in the Lean Six Sigma approach. So requirement to be an engineer, I don't think so. Knowing mathematics, basic mathematics, yes. Anyway, kahit naman po nagturo ako sa Pilipinas, nagturo ako ng mga psychology major, pre-dentistry major, nagturo ako ng mga nursing, psychology major, engineering major. Meron basic mathematics eh. And part of that is statistics eh. Knowing statistics is enough for you to proceed with analytical work with regards to this behavior-based safety. If you wanted to make your analysis as a team as what you call this, as objective as possible. I hope that I answered the question.
Okay, thank you, sir. Last question. If someone do a violation and we give them penalty, and then they stop those violation, what do we call it? Positive or negative reinforcement?
If someone do a violation and we'll give them a penalty, actually giving a penalty is actually a negative consequence. And normally that's the reason why we don't recommend giving penalty, because if you notice, if you go back to the power of consequence, those which are soon, certain, and positive consequence are the ones that emerge as powerful, and those which are negative, what you call this, later, uncertain, and negative consequence are normally less favorable. So, in the hierarchy of preference, giving penalty is actually the last thing to do, and hindi natin ina-encourage talaga yan kahit sa safety because of that principle. Okay. Now, assuming that you have given already the penalty and they stop the violation, then actually it's not even considered as a reinforcement. It's actually a consequence. Okay. You can say that it is a positive because you added, but it is a negative consequence. It is a positive reinforcement, but a negative consequence. Because the definition of positive reinforcement is you add something to the person. So you added the penalty because of committing the violation. But that particular action of giving the penalty is a negative consequence. I hope I answered the question.
Okay. Thank you po, sir. So, yes po. We'll entertain one last question po from Mr. Gerald. Yes po.
Yes.
Sir Rodel, sorry, will you allow me to be the very last?
Sure.
Since na-mention ni Sir kanina, so I'm also an ex-OFW, regarding to sa the system in place in every country where Filipinos were totally be comply or talagang we really abide. I don't know exactly what will be the term in the questions that I would like to raise is why do Filipinos how do you impart on this kind of system? Why do Filipinos really katulad natin sumusunod especially in the Middle East? And then here in our country, marami tayong talagang palusot, no? Does it really the behaviors that is already in place on that country? Since meron silang impositions, why not kung doon natin ilalagay yung ganung sistema sa bansa natin? Like, sabi nga natin in the layman's, kung may pugot, susunod naman tayo. Does it really pertains to a behavior or to the system? Thank you, sir.
Una po, balik ako dun sa definition ng attitude, behavior, and culture. Yung attitude po kasi at yung culture parehas invisible. Hindi mo siya nakikita. Okay, so it means that there's no way for us to know whether what is the attitude of the person and what the culture behaves or what the culture is having at this point. So knowing that, wala tayong way to measure and to evaluate whether for what reason the people behave on as far as the culture is concerned or bakit ganun ang attitude ng tao. Okay. Now, ang tanong is bakit pag nasa ibang bansa tayo ay lumusunod tayo at ano no. Kaya tayo nag-aral ng behavior-based safety ngayon kasi among the three, mas madali kasing mabago yung behavior kumpara sa attitude at culture. Kasi pag nabago mo yung behavior ng isang tao at palagi niya itong ginagawa, nagiging parte na to ng attitude niya. Kaya na sinabi ko, the definition of attitude is that this is a predetermined set of rules. And kasi yun yung na-experience niya eh. Dati nagpapautang siya, ngayon ayaw niya kasi walang nagbayad ng utang. No? So yun yung naging attitude niya kasi na-experience niya eh. No? Pero gaya ng isang nagmamaneho na lagi niyang ginagawa yun, kapag lagi niyang paulit-ulit na isinasabuhay yun, nagiging kultura niya na yun, no? Ay naging parte ng kanyang pagkatao na yun. At mapapansin mo sa mga taong nasasanay sa Pilipinas, nasanay dito mag-wear ng seatbelt, pagdating sa Pilipinas, suot-suot na rin niya yung seatbelt. I'll give you an example also itong pandemic. Nung una, ilang tayo magsuot ng mask. Pero nakasanayan natin. Ngayon, kapag nagsuot tayo kapag hindi natin nasuot ng mask, para may kulang. So that defines the attitude of the person because it completes the cycle, it repeats the cycle. Now, culture is defined by shared belief, values. So it means, again, it is influenced by the individual attitude of the people. So ngayon, ang question, bakit ganun ang mga tao sa Pilipinas? Is it because of the culture or is it because of the attitude? Combined po. Kasi kung maayos sana yung kultura natin, hindi magre-resulta ng ganun ang tao. Ngayon, napupersa tayo mag-behave in accordance to the requirement ng bansa kasi maayos yung kultura. It influences us. If you go back to the cycle na pinakita ko kanina, the culture influences the attitude as well as the behavior. So na-impluwensyahan tayo. Kumikilos tayo ayon doon sa impluwensyang yon. So kung ganun sana, pero hindi natin, kaso, hindi agad-agad natin mababago yung kultura eh. Custom yun eh. Nakasanayan na ng tao. 'Di ba? Yung mga tinatawag na pamahiin, hindi agad-agad yun nababago eh. Yung tao ang magbabago nun, kulturang yon, kasi parte tayo ng kulturang yon. So if the Philippine government or the Filipino society as a whole, not only because of the government, the Filipino society as a whole will will influence the people to do what is right, to do what is good, then the people will behave in that manner, which later on will benefit also to the culture. Mas madali po kasi baguhin yung behavior ng tao kasi nakikita mo eh. Pagka may sinabi siya mali, nag-post siya ng fake news sa social media o nagmura siya, masasaway mo agad siya eh. Kasi alam mong mali eh. Pero yung tumatakbo sa isip niya, kasi attitude yun eh. Tumatakbo sa isip niya, ano yung perception niya, hindi niyo po alam yun. Lalo na, kung hindi mo kayang baguhin yung attitude ng isang tao, paano mo babaguhin yung attitude ng sandamakmak na tao? And that is the culture. So the only way for us to improve our society is that change from within. Baguhin natin po ating sarili. Sabi ko nga, kung tayo ay pasaway nung nasa Pilipinas, ako po ay isa doon. Iba po ako mag-drive pag nasa Pilipinas kumpara dito nung nasa ibang bansa. But when we try to use whatever things we have learned, whatever things we have adopted here, at bitbitin natin lahat yon sa Pilipinas, so hindi lang pala issue yung brain drain na pag umalis ang Pilipino sa Pilipinas ay nawawalan tayo. May nadadagdag pala sa kultura ng Pilipinas kasi bibigyan natin sila ng pagbabago. Kung hindi natin mabago sa sarili natin, huwag tayong maghanap ng pagbabago sa pangkalahatan. I hope there is sense on what I said.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Salamat po sa ating lahat. Time check, it's almost 6:30 here in UAE and 10:30 in the Philippines. So once and for all, we would like to thank Dr. Rajel for very insightful training that we had. Especially, we rarely have trainings about behaviors. No, what are the what behavior should we observe at our workplace? No, so maraming salamat po, Dr. Rajel, and maraming salamat po sa ating mga participants for today. So for those people who came in late, we will post the video po in our new YouTube account, so you can go in there. You can search for FILSA Safety Advocates on YouTube, and the training, the recording of the training for today will be posted there, and as well as the previous trainings. Or you can also go into our Facebook account where the recorded live session is also there. So once again, thank you. And if you have queries, you can email us and we'll get back to you regarding the training certificate and membership through your email. Maraming salamat po. Have a great day, guys.